Hey, thank you so much for having us on here, David, and g'day to all the listeners out there.
Thank you for being on. And I mean, you're controversial, even though that you focus on food, you focus on vaccines, but you do go up against the mainstream media quite a bit. And some people might say that you kind of lean towards conspiracy sometimes, and you kind of counter what the mainstream media is saying. And I just wanted to get your take, since I mean the world is going through this pandemic. I wanted to get your take on what you think is happening here. Is this a real virus? Is it as bad as they're saying? What are you seeing in Australia and the people that you know?
Yeah, it's really interesting what's happening in the world. And first and foremost, I have compassion and empathy for everybody out there, wherever you are, however you are dealing with this bizarre thing that is happening to the world. Whether you've lost your job, whether you are in quarantine, whether you are in hospital, whether you are living in a state of fear, whether you think it's all bullshit, or wherever you are, and that might change by the minute or the day or by the month, depending on what's going on. Me personally, I haven't been affected by the virus in any way, shape, or form as far as health-wise goes. And I was recently interviewed for our 60 Minutes network, and they asked me pretty much the same question that you did. They asked, "Do you think this is real?" And I said, by all accounts, to the best of my knowledge at the moment, there seems to be a virus that is a coronavirus that is called COVID-19, and how that affects people is really quite interesting. And I'm watching the US, I'm watching other parts of the world, I'm watching what's happening in Australia, and I'm also being sent a lot of information from different areas. Some would say conspiracy sites, some would say from functional medical doctors and virologists and epidemiologists. And all I can say is that there seems to be a hell of a lot of conflicting and hypocritical information that is coming through. So for me to actually give a truthful answer isn't difficult, because my only truthful answer is I have no fucking idea, to be honest with you. And apologies for the language, but that is how I feel most days. And when I answered that question to 60 Minutes, I said, to the best of my ability, this disease is here, or this virus is here. And they asked me, do I think it's a pandemic? And I said, well, time will tell if it is actually a pandemic. I mean, it has been labeled one, but I wouldn't go so far to say that just yet, because, again, we go back to the conflicting information. I mean, even this week, we've got conflicting information coming out of Florida hospitals. We have President Trump that is sort of trying to circumvent or circumnavigate, or whatever that word is, the CDC, because potentially there could be issues in how these numbers are being recorded. And we've all seen and heard the stories of falsified information. And just to bring it back home to here in Australia, we have 7 states or territories: Victoria, Queensland, New South Wales, Western Australia, South Australia, Tasmania, Northern Territory, and Australia's Capital Territory. And each different state or territory that we have in our country has different laws and regulations and different advice that's happening over in between these borders. And they're constantly changing, where our premiers of our states, I guess, would be the equivalent of your governors for your states in the US. And even in those situations, there's fighting, there's disagreement with the Prime Minister, who is our version of your president. So again, it doesn't make sense. They seem to be, this week in Australia, we seem to be going through what people would be called a second wave. We opened up, and now we're closing down with more heavier restrictions in certain areas. But that has coincided with more testing. And it was fascinating, because I was watching the news the other day, someone sent me, and the language that they use to describe what is happening is really interesting. So the testing goes up. They're not even saying COVID-19 now on the news stations that I could hear. They're just calling it coronavirus. And David and the listeners who know this, we know we've always had coronaviruses. They've been with us for however long. So we can test for a coronavirus, most of us, because we already have it in us. So we've gone into this new lockdown phase in Australia in certain states because they're testing more, which is resulting in a higher incidence of people with coronavirus, not COVID-19, which means that they're putting in stricter lockdown measures. So to the point where one of our states is now talking about implementing mandatory masks if people are leaving in certain areas. And it seems to be following suit of what's happening in certain parts of the US. But interestingly enough, the death rate, we have a very, 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 very low death rate. And I think it's at 108 now out of a population of nearly 26 million people. And the people that have died from this in this country generally seem to be in the 80 to 90-year-old bracket that already have some sort of underlying disease or illness of 2 or 3 comorbidities. If that's the correct word, I'm not a scientist, but go with me here. And so it doesn't seem to affect anybody that is young and healthy or even elderly and healthy. So it's a really interesting thing. And one of the things that I've been quite vocal about is why is the world shut down for this that has such a very, 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 very low death rate compared to the existing issues in the world, whether it be starvation in certain areas of the world, homelessness, cancer, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, whatever these other issues that are causing even medical misdiagnosis and medical interventions gone wrong, which cause so many illnesses. I mean, so many deaths, I should say, not illnesses. But why is this one virus caught our attention like nothing else when so many things kill more people, like way more people? And yet we haven't seemed to come together to fix these other issues. And I have to say, so many of these other issues, including this virus, and this is probably the most controversial thing I'll say, is I believe we can be completely in a state of healthy mind, body, and spirit to not even have to worry about a virus or viruses when they do come through, whether it be the flu, whether it be a coronavirus, whether it be anything else that comes through the population. If we are robust and healthy and physically, emotionally, and spiritually aligned and evolving, then we've coexisted with these viruses and we actually need them. So it's a very interesting time, and I'm happy to go deeper with you if you want to ask some other questions. But that's probably the best way I can sum up where I'm at now.
I want to get into the healthy part, the eating right, but before we get there, I just wanted to mention this because I think a lot of people are waiting for this magical vaccine to come out because here in the United States they keep talking about, well, you're not going to be safe unless you get the vaccine, and I know Bill Gates has been out there. He's been pushing vaccines. Actually, he wants certain, I guess people, if you want to go back to work, if you want to do anything, you would have to prove that you're vaccinated. And it feels like that's the direction they're moving in. Do you think the vaccine is going to be the game changer where we're all going to feel safe? I mean, are we going to need a vaccine for this?
Well, it was another question that I was asked on 60 Minutes. And I was sitting across from the head interviewer or head reporter for Australia 60 Minutes, and she asked me the question. She said, will you take the vaccine? And I said, I don't take any other vaccines. I don't get the flu shot every year because I believe in my body. I believe in my body's ability to be able to stay healthy and robust. So if a vaccine comes out, and I listened this morning actually, it's today's date is Thursday in July and Wednesday for you at the moment. Oh, actually Friday for me, Thursday for you. And right. I listened to Donald Trump's address that was recorded a few hours ago. And he said that he has great people working. I think this is how he speaks. Great people working on the vaccine that will be ready hopefully very soon. And he's got the military on hand to be able to administer that or deliver that for the people that choose to have it. So I see the vaccine as a solution for the people that would like to feel safe by having that, just like the people in this country, in your country, that take a flu shot, for instance. I have no issue with anybody that has a free choice to be able to put whatever they want into their bodies, whether it be junk food, whether it be a vaccine, whether it be pharmaceuticals, whether it be what they watch on television that might be junk. I do believe we have free will currently. So I'm not opposed to anybody taking a vaccine if that's their choice. I am opposed to something that would maybe become mandatory because, like I said, I trust my body. I have no fear over coronavirus or COVID-19 if it was to enter my system. But I know there's a lot of people out there that do not look at themselves in that light. There's a lot of people that see themselves as vulnerable. There's a lot of people that feel they're a victim. A lot of people that do not have the tools or the education yet to be able to know even how to build a robust immune system. And this is the question that, so going back to the vaccine, when they asked me that on 60 Minutes, I said, no, I would not. But I would love for them to be able to prove over long-term studies that there would be no side effects for every human being, no matter what age, no matter what ethnicity, no matter what underlying health condition somebody has, that there will be no detrimental side effects. Once they prove that 100%, which they never will be able to do because we know one size does not fit all. And then I hope if they can prove that, then if people choose to have a vaccine, then so be it. It's at their risk. And I would hopefully believe that legislating or the laws would change that if there are side effects, that the people administering it and the people that make it can be held accountable for any damage that it has caused. But then going back throughout this whole pandemic, that they call it, not one health minister, not one politician, not one, doctor in authority that has a platform to speak to the masses in this country has come out and started talking about how to build a healthy immune system, when we know that a virus attacks or weakens an immune system. So I find that very troubling and concerning, that because over the last 3 or 4 months, I've interviewed 20 or 30 really fascinating doctors and virologists and people that work around viruses. And the first thing that they always say is, what we need to do is keep a healthy immune system. And they talk about it. They go, okay, this is how we do it. You need to include zinc. You need to include vitamin C. You need to include vitamin D, get adequate amounts of that. You need to include selenium. You need to have foods that contain lithium in them as well. And I'm not talking about the pharmaceutical, but I'm talking about the foods that have these. We need to have, I think I said zinc before, the vitamin E, vitamin A, vitamin K2. So how do we do this? And that, when I said that to the reporter from 60 Minutes, she said, well, that's common sense. People know how to keep a healthy immune system. And I said, have you been outside and looked at the population? She goes, it's common sense. I said, well, it might be common sense for you because you're in a position where you look after yourself, and so am I, because I've done the research and I'm passionate about how do our bodies work, how do our minds work, how does our belief systems work. But for the general public, I would not be able to say that I would not be able to say that as strongly, that they care about that as much as, or have the information like you or I do, or you, David. So, and that our health authorities haven't spoken about this, that's probably the most bewildering aspect of this whole pandemic over the last 5 or 6 months. And this might sound crazy, but the only person that I've heard speak about it in a position of authority is Donald Trump. He has spoken about vitamin D from the sun. He's actually spoken about zinc. He's actually spoken about the pharmaceutical hydrochloroquine. and been shut down by the mainstream media. So why is this information not being more readily spoken about and delivered to the public instead of put a mask on, which we know can lower the immune system, wash your hands or sanitize, which we also know can lower the immune system through using a hand sanitizer. I mean, there's that many scientific tests that say it fucks with your microbiome. And wearing a mask can mess up your immune system as well. So they're giving us this information that sort of flies in the face of science, yet leaving out the what I would call the lowest hanging fruit. How do we build a resilient, robust, and long-term, sustainable, healthy body?
I agree with you. And I'll give you my personal experience. And maybe it's different from what you have experienced, but I feel like the food today it's not the way it was going back in time. I feel with a lot of the processed food today, because when I stopped eating processed food, I stopped eating, box food or pre-made food, and I started to use real fresh ingredients, real fresh vegetables and everything like that. I noticed, and I got rid of all the preservatives, all the chemicals. When you read the boxes, it's just a list of all chemicals. There's really no food in there. I felt like once I started to do that, all of a sudden I didn't get sick as much. And as I kept doing it and my wife kept doing it, we hardly got sick. We don't catch colds. We don't get the flu. We always have a lot of energy. And I'm just wondering, do you think they changed the food, the ingredients in the food where it kind of like minimizes our immune system, where it can't fight against sickness?
Well, here's my take, David, on everything. And I said it earlier. We all have a choice. We all have free will currently. And when it comes to food, it comes down to what we choose to have. I actually started my cooking career. I've been a chef for 30 years, but when I was a teenager, I started working in McDonald's, for instance, when I was 14 years of age. And I'm very grateful for that experience because it actually taught me a lot about teamwork, cleanliness, organization, systems, and structure, and delivering a consistent product. But I see McDonald's these days and I drive past them, but I have no compulsion to go in there and eat that food because it doesn't resonate for me. But I don't need to campaign and say, hey, shut down all the McDonald's, because again, people have free will. If they choose to eat it, that's their prerogative, and they need to be accountable and responsible for every single action that everybody does in life. Every single choice that we make is our responsibility, and we need to be accountable for that. So when you go into a supermarket, for instance, or a grocery store, and 80% of the food that's in there is in a box, you do not need to buy that or purchase that. No one's forcing anybody to eat that. And I understand that there's certain issues with budget and availability of produce. So I understand that, but I'm also of the huge belief that there's always solutions to the biggest issues that we have in life. So for the last 10 years, I've been promoting what you would call, and you mentioned it before, sort of old school diets. And the best way I can describe that is I promote a diet called paleo, and paleo just means old. That's actually the literal translation to it. Old ways of eating. So what do I mean by that, or what does that mean? It means eating to the best of our abilities to mimic pretty much our hunter-gatherer ancestors or our tribal ancestors from all around the world. And one thing they had in common was nothing in a box, obviously, no preservatives, nothing that wasn't organic. Everything was organic once upon a time, like 100 years ago or 110 years ago. Everything was organic, and it wasn't fancy. It was just real food. So all we do at the moment is replicate that to the best of our ability. And I'm a big fan of the human definition of being an omnivore. So I take from the land, whether it be plant-based foods and animal-based foods, or from the ocean, also plant-based or animal-based. It's a really simple formula. So I don't favor one over the other. It depends on the season. So at the moment in Australia, it's cold. So I'm sort of doing more slow cooking, more broths, more soups, more curries, more braises, more of these sort of nourishing foods, meat on the bone, lots of offal. and a lot of bone broth. Whereas in summer, when it's a bit cooler, I'm eating more seafood, more vegetables out of the garden, more fresh herbs. So it's lighter food. And I feel like that is how we would have done it when over our evolutionary history as well. Colder, more nourishing. When it's hotter, cooling foods. But both from plant and animal sources, and especially nose to tail, and especially really appreciating the fat that comes from those animals, and also healthy animal fat, healthy plant-based fats too. So I made a film with my team a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, and it was on Netflix for 2 years until the contract just expired a couple of months ago. And it was called The Magic Pill. And what I wanted to explore with that and to demonstrate and to illustrate was that just the simple fact of changing our diet, removing what you said, the processed food, the foods in the box, and just going back to really simple. And the best way, one of the people I interviewed was an Australian fella who was working with our Indigenous, and he had a retreat where the Indigenous would come and basically they would eat their traditional diet in the 21st century. So again, it was meat and vegetables or seafood and vegetables or whatever they could gather. And in that retreat, all of the participants got off their type 2 diabetes medication. Pretty much they were all on it within 2 weeks, just from adopting this diet. And I'm not telling people to do that, even though I would recommend people to investigate a paleo or low carb / ketogenic diet. And we explored the world, and we filmed in the States, and we showed how we can reverse type 2 diabetes in pretty much 9 out of 10 cases. We showed how autoimmune disease can be dramatically improved by cutting out certain foods that cause inflammation in the body. We showed how children with autism can improve, not all the time, but can improve their mental clarity and behavior by removing foods that cause inflammation to the brain and to the body. And we also explored how modern science and modern multinational food corporations have bought science. And so that was sort of the opening for me as far as, and I don't like to use the word conspiracy theorist, because we proved, and others have proved, that our dietary guidelines in the USA, Canada, UK, Australia, New Zealand, etc., have been widely influenced through multinational food agricultural companies, and also through religious dogma. And that maybe is for another conversation, but it's fascinating once you dig deep to understand how these guidelines were actually created or conceived and then implemented and then taken as fact, when in fact they have contributed to what I would say so much illness, so much deception, so many lives to have been lost earlier than they needed to be lost, and for so much pain and suffering and debilitation of so many people that have trusted in these organizations and institutions that have had what they would say our best interests at heart, when in fact it has been sort of the best interests were actually the people that this benefited the most, which is, some corporations and industries and organizations. So once you see what has happened to our food and how it has been brainwashed into our children, and even myself when I went through primary school and high school, we used to follow the food pyramid. That's a form of educational brainwashing. And now when I spoke out about this 10 years ago, I was labeled crazy, a nutcase, no proof of evidence that what I'm promoting can actually help people. And I have to say, David, and I didn't create this. I have interviewed that many amazing people that have devoted their life, doctors, scientists, researchers, professors, patients, anyone in the health space. And I've shared thousands upon thousands of stories of people improving their health or getting off medication or reducing their medication and living a life that they never dreamed possible. And I'm talking people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s that feel like a teenager again, just from this simple fact of changing a few things in their diet, and pretty small things. but they had to, most of them had to hit rock bottom before they made the change. So when I look at this pandemic that's happening at the moment, I see people going, trusting these authorities that lied to us about how to eat healthy. And these same people are trusting the government and the authorities now and our health ministers for this virus when we know they've lied to us in the past. And I can't tell you the future, but all I know is when the pain becomes that unbearable for people, that's when they'll make a change. Now, I'm watching what's happening in the United States where kids aren't going to school in certain states,
Right.
that businesses are shut down for huge periods of time. And suicide rates are going up, domestic violence is going up, crime is going up. All of these effects from our authorities telling us that we cannot do these certain things. Now, I don't know what the breaking point is for humanity, but I feel like if something doesn't change soon, then we will witness the breaking point and we will potentially then see an awakening if it's not too late and new systems being built. But at the same time, I'm also seeing people outside of the, I guess what you would call the mainstream narrative, are offering solutions. And I'm seeing some amazing things happening over the last 5 months in response to this, what I would call somewhat insane lockdown measures. I'm seeing solutions popping up left, right, and center for a new way of life. So I'm not all doom and gloom. I see light at the end of the tunnel, and there's some amazing people offering solutions at the moment, which I am gravitating towards and helping share that information to people to hopefully either offer a glimmer of hope or ways in which people can go about a new way of life. And we can talk about that maybe on another podcast down the track when some of these things start to materialize and start to manifest into a larger scale. But I'm sort of sitting back and watching it all unfold in a state of awe, bewilderment, frustration, confusion, excitement. I think every day, I go through so many different emotional states.
I think we're all going through that.
And I think it's a wonderful time. So anybody that's listening, if you do have an inkling or something inside of you that feels like you do want to change your diet, then this might be the perfect podcast. Is why you're listening to it now, so that you can build a healthy, robust immune system. And if you haven't heard of me before, my podcast is actually called Evolve. I had to change the name from Heal because I got some pressure from our health authority in Australia, or some doctors in Australia that wanted to take me to court for using the word heal. So I've called it Evolve now. But you jump onto our podcast called Evolve, and we go through different types of things, like you probably do, David, in how we look at sex, how we look at emotional well-being, how we look at our belief systems, how we look at regenerative agricultural practices, how we look at sex, how we look at the way that we think, and the ways in which we can create new neural pathways in which we can go along this journey with less baggage, so to speak. And so that's what I'm passionate about. I love learning new information and taking the bits that resonate with me at this particular point in time and seeing how I can integrate that into my life to be able to stay grounded while there's so much turmoil and uncertainty and fear circulating in our communities at the moment. So I'm quietly enjoying the ride, but at the same time, as I said at the start, I feel compassion and empathy and sympathy for so many people that are really, really struggling at the moment. And I've had friends commit suicide recently. I had a pretty horrific accident surfing a week and a half ago. And fascinatingly enough, I'm using everything that I've learned over the last 10 years in relation to nutrition, in relation to biohacking techniques, in relation to alternative or ancient or including modern scientific therapies. And the surgeon I saw last week, or actually this week on Monday, 4 days ago, said, you might be on crutches for the next month. And I was off them within 1 day after seeing him, and I'm walking around. And
wow.
People are like, I can't believe what you're doing. I'm like, well, I'm doing this. There's probably 50 things that I'm doing. And my wife has been great by cooking me bone broths every day and filling me up with collagen. But we are not, the human body is amazing. The human spirit is wondrous, and the way that we can deal with every single thing that happens to us or that we can manifest in the world. I'm so excited about that. The not only our personal creation of our own realities, but the co-creation as a community into what we can build. And I can't help but think that this is an invitation for us all to go inside to find the places in us that are out of balance or out of alignment, whether it's our nutrition, whether it's the way that we sleep, whether it's what we watch, what we listen to, how we speak to ourselves, how we speak to others, where we get our information from, and how we connect to nature, and how our belief systems that we have either adopted or inherited from our parents or our culture. And intuitively, each and every one of us, David, yourself, your listeners, and myself, we know when we're out of balance in any of these sort of what I would call the pillars of health. And interestingly enough, it doesn't take that much to bring us back into balance. All it takes is the intention and then putting it into action with one step at a time to start to bring all of that back into alignment, into balance, so we can be grounded, so that we can deal with whatever is thrown at us, or so we can make what I would call logical, empowered, and beautiful decisions in which we can keep evolving personally and also as a community. So that's sort of where I'm at the moment, and I hope that resonates for you and for your listeners.
Yeah, it does. You said something very interesting about people waking up from this experience with the pandemic, where people are starting to see things differently.
Mm-hmm.
See things differently. Do you think with this, what's going on in the world right now, people are starting to move away from like maybe what the mainstream, what some certain government officials are telling them, and they're starting to do their own research where they're saying, you know something, I don't know if I should believe this anymore because I see things changing. I have time now to look at everything. Do you think there is an awakening going on right now and people are starting to look at everything differently?
This might sound crazy, but I'm always of the opinion that everything is in perfect balance, regardless. So even though sometimes I wake up and I feel like I'm living in the strangest film
Yeah.
of my life. I was talking to a friend yesterday that this is a pretty fucking weird film at the moment. What's going on this year? And
Yes.
he was doing a treatment on me, which is an ancient, an Australian treatment called Bowen therapy, Bowen. And I know there's Bowen therapists all around the world, and it's a non-invasive muscle therapy that was amazing. We were having this great conversation because he's quite a conspiracy theorist, and but I do believe that everything's in balance. And as you say, there's or mention of the awakening. I see more and more people through my network of saying, we are awakening to something new inside us. But at the same time, I see other people doubling down, going into more of a fear-based mode than of a abundance mode, or of a loving belief pattern. So what do I think is going to happen if the vaccine comes, and if it's not mandatory? And I would love for it not to be mandatory. That would be my the greatest gift, I think.
Mine too.
I think the people that, as I said earlier, the people that choose to take it, go for it. If that is what makes you feel safer in the community, if that is what makes you feel safer in your being, then by all means, you have free will to be able to do that. My perception is I feel like it could cause some major issues for people. So I don't want people to take it because I do feel like it will mess up your immune system, regardless, because that's apparently what a lot of vaccines can do. I'm not saying that all of them do that, but from my understanding, there's certain ones out there that are not safe to put into our system. And just to for anybody that is pro-vaccine out there, I just want to make this statement. So we have in Australia a pretty much similar to your FDA. We have something called a TGA, the Therapeutics Goods Association of Australia. And they're the sort of gatekeepers of what gets into the market as a therapeutic good. And they oversee the vaccine schedule, I believe, in this country. And somebody asked them recently for the Freedom of Information Act, can you provide evidence that the 2020 flu vaccine that is currently in circulation in Australia has been independently tested for safety, that has no bias in there. So it hasn't been tested by the company that makes it. It's been independently tested before it's been rolled out. Because in Australia, I think 10 million or 20 million shots of flu vaccine get administered every year. And they came back and said, there is no evidence to support what you're asking for. So that should ring alarm bells for anybody that believes that everything that is pharmaceutical or vaccine has been tested for safety 100%, because it hasn't been independently tested, or for long-term, what happens long-term. And I've interviewed that many mothers with their children that they said they had healthy children, and within a day or two of having a certain vaccine, that child no longer behaved the way that they once were. And I've interviewed so many other parents that the child has had vaccines and no change in the behavior. So my question always is, why does it affect some and not others? And that's where my fear would be for the new vaccine that comes out for this coronavirus, because if a flu vaccine hasn't been able to eradicate the flu, and from people getting the flu, even with people that have had the flu vaccine. And I've interviewed a lot of people whose parents or grandparents have passed away or had strokes or whatever it may be within 24 hours of having flu vaccine. That could be a coincidence. But so many coincidences after a while, or anecdotal stories, adds up to be, something's not right here. Again, why some people get affected and other people not? So when this coronavirus vaccine comes out, I would presume that the same thing will happen. Certain people will have an effect where nothing will happen, hopefully. Whereas other people, we might have major effects happen, loss of life, disability, whatever it may be, brain damage. And that would be concerning. And that's why I would not put that into my system, because it's a risk. There is a risk involved, I believe, to putting that a pharmaceutical concoction that hasn't been tested. And we know they're rushing this vaccine. They reckon that usually it takes 7 years to 10 years to test a vaccine, except maybe the flu vaccine, because they bring one out every year. But for this one, they're already doing human trials in the world. It's like, fucking hell, we know what happened with the Moderna trials recently that they did in the US for the number one candidate for the vaccine for this, and it had disastrous results. It had, I think it was 20% of the people that it was applied to or injected into suffered major illness from it. That's 20%. So, yeah, I would be very cautious. But again, it's up to everybody whether they want to have that in their bodies or not. I'll go without. I'll go with healthy living
Yes.
for as long as I can, and we'll see whether it becomes mandatory. I don't think they'll be able to make it mandatory. I just can't see. Yeah, I think there would be a mass, not a mass pushback from the public, to be honest with you. But then, from what I've heard, they will potentially, or then potentially could be a higher, a more toxic strain of the coronavirus if enough people push back on a mandatory vaccine. And I'm probably going down the conspiracy theory route, but that's I've had a lot of people send me sort of the agenda and the plan of what may happen, and I'll use the word may. So if enough people sort of stand up and say they don't want it, then if a higher mortality rate of virus enters the public domain with a 30% or 40% mortality rate rather than this 0.003 mortality rate that we're witnessing at the moment, then I think they'll push back on they'll push forward on a mandatory vaccine.
So you think if enough people say, I'm not going to take the vaccine, you think they're going to push something else? Or this is what you've been hearing, they're going to be pushing something that's even deadlier?
I've been sent many things, and some would seem very outlandish, and this might seem very outlandish, and I pray that this doesn't take place. But from this one document that was sent to me back in March, everything seems to be going in order of what they predicted. And further down the line is what I just mentioned. Now, it could just be coincidences of where we're at the moment, but from what I was sent in March and now we're in July, it seems to be going according to that plan. And when I first saw it, I was like, there's no way that's going to happen. And then I look back at it every week and I'm like, oh, fuck.
Well, do you, I mean, from the I mean, I don't know if you want to say it or you don't want to say it. From the document, September, October, November, are we looking at that time frame right there for something to happen?
That's what I was saying about October. September, October, November. Yeah.
Because I know Trump, he's also, not just vaccines, he's pushing therapeutics. Like, I mean, back in March, he mentioned hydroxychloroquine, but he's also talking about therapeutics, and he's leaning more towards therapeutics.
Yeah,
away from
I heard
vaccines.
That too.
So I'm just wondering if he has something else up his sleeve.
Well, listening to that one today, and yeah, thank you for fixing the hydroxychloroquine.
Yeah,
I think I said hydrochloroquine before, so thanks for adding the XY in there. And I was listening to his talk today, as I mentioned, and he did say vaccines and/or therapeutics. So yeah, I would like to believe that Trump is on the right team, and from what I can see so far, it seems to be that way. But again, I've been sent so many things that says he's not. I'm like, oh, fuck.
Well,
but I tell you what, if it goes the other way, then I think we're in a lot of trouble. So I think I'm the only Australian person with profile that has started sharing Trump's speeches and the things that Trump is doing in Australia, much to the amusement of our mainstream media, sort of linking me as a Trump supporter, because you're not allowed. Apparently, if you have a high profile, you're not allowed to support Trump. But so far, I am enjoying and holding hope for what he is doing. And as somebody, and not that this is a reason that I appreciate what Trump is doing, but as somebody that's been in mainstream media in Australia for the last 10 or 20 years, and some would say that I'm probably the most controversial, high-profile figure in Australia, and the media like to talk about me and ridicule me and make lies about me, as Trump would say, fake news.
Right.
To be on the receiving end of that and to witness that firsthand of how the mainstream media can manipulate, ridicule, attempt to ruin somebody's reputation through lies and misinformation, and through taking things out of context. I can see why the mainstream or the population would not have a good feeling about Trump if that is where they get their information from the mainstream news. Very much like in Australia here, if people just read mainstream news and formed an opinion about me, if that was their only source of information, then most people would think that I was I was crazy or whatever the words they like to use, an anti-vaxxer, even though I've never said that I'm an anti-vaxxer. I'm just for safety. But yeah, so fingers crossed that Trump is the light and his team are doing the right thing. And if they're not, then I think we could be fucked.
Yes, I agree with you.
Excuse my language. But, because the government in Australia is very much along the same, not they would be more along the Democratic line and the Liberal sort of line, or the leftist line. And it's interesting because I speak to a lot of people in the States. I've got a lot of friends over there in the functional medical or integrative medical space, and they all say that Australia is probably the most conservative and backward government in the world. And
wow,
you think you got it? They're like, we think we got it tough over here in Australia. I mean, in the United States, but you guys, you have it way worse with your government. So it's interesting. So it's going to be interesting to see what plays out. So hopefully Trump gets through this November election, and hopefully he can put some influence down here, down under, to our continent as well.
I hope so. Chef Pete, thank you very much for being on the X22 Report Spotlight. Once again, how can people listen to your podcast?
Yeah, you can very simply. You can go to my website, peteevans.com, and go to podcast and have a listen. It's pretty much on every podcast network that's out there. It's called Evolve. Stay tuned. You can watch my film, The Magic Pill, which is on food, pretty much on Amazon or most streaming services. And I'm about to release one on cannabis called The Magic Plant in the coming month. So stay tuned for that. And I've got a